send me that picture, I might put on my LinkedIn then afterwards.
Yeah, I can send you some pictures. It's a camera phone. It's not a professional
It's
photographer.
all right. It's just
We do have one or two photographers working
That
for
pretty
us
much
here in this
explains
event, and they'll have like the
the
$1,000
battles we
Nikon
take,
camera
what we
that
have,
they can
what
help
we
you
deal
with.
with.
So
Building
last
the
year,
road's
Summit
easy.
posted a lot of
Repairing one's a
pictures
lot
to
more
our Flickr
difficult.
account, which are free for anybody to look at. So in other words, I might send you a few pictures that are kind of like lame, but there might be some other pictures later on, like next
Yeah.
week, for the summit, like day one, day
We're
two,
still
that
doing
you
some
might
work
see
down
some.
the
So
Coast
you might
side,
see the cameraman
rebuilding
pop
some
in here
dune
or
line
something
and all
like
of it.
yeah. I'll probably send
but it's
a
open.
LinkedIn right out after this. So if you send me that picture, I'll send out a LinkedIn.
If you send it to me an email, I do have a LinkedIn account.
So
Check in months.
so what do you guys do in your real time? You know, when you're not on the board doing board work.
I work with the sheriff's office.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing. Are you working in any of the automation or drone industry stuff, or are you mostly?
Mostly not. No.
Okay.
No. We use a lot of it for through DOT though. We've got
Right.
they found it.
Basil and those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love them. Yeah. We work with them very close. I'm starting to work with them on the weather pieces of drone. I'll talk a little bit about that as a resiliency, component of any, operation, especially tactical, like you say, short term.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out where people are buried and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's we started using a little bit.
Thank you.
We just as a couple agencies back home that started picking them up. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I've given out all mine. I should have brought more.
Yeah, that's all right. You just know what you just need. Yeah, you have to have a weather card. So now you know what to get me though. If you ever want to talk, you're gonna probably pick. Today there'll be a lot of education around what you can do with weather data, right? And resiliency.
How long have you been doing it? 35. Really?
Yeah, I have a degree in meteorology and got out of school and I went to the Air Force. Started practicing my trade and worked 24 years in the Air Force and actually ran the Air Force base in Central Asia, so I run operations. Yeah, I actually run most of it.
Part of Asia.
It was on the western border of China.
We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. About 2 minutes.
The only base.
We got 128.
Yeah, so I have a really good understanding of the supply chain. I was the OC director. So I'm emergency operations. Involved with that. That's the base responsibility. So yeah, so I do is everything is weather stuff, weather stuff, stuff. Didn't know that. There is. You're right. You're right. And that's kind of what I decided with my company. I was a science and technology director for the weather service too. I got frustrated by technology innovation. I was telling the company, what have I done to all that? In other words, like I built this with that idea that I have to become a trusted partner. You just trust me.
Be careful when you back up here.
Oh yeah, that was talking about resiliency and
Tight squeeze, but it's okay.
and so calling that data and having a trusted source and you guys shouldn't have to worry about all those weather data.
Tomorrow's raining, tomorrow's sunny, tomorrow's cold.
So what we do too is we have operations center and all the guys like we have contract meetings by several times.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Moran. I'm a member of the Board of Transportation. And in this session, we're going to talk about an issue that hits close to home for me on the Outer Banks. and that's how to mitigate against future flooding and other disasters. In the wake of Hurricane Florence, the DOT has already begun to build the new normal. Also, we have completed a comprehensive study last year and identified several capital improvement projects that will make flood-prone sections of Interstate 95 and 40 more resilient and less vulnerable to flooding. Last fall, the DOT developed a 5-year plan to boost the number of all-electric vehicles and zero-emission vehicles in our state. I've been asked to remind everybody, I think by this point everybody's been reminded of the app. So if you haven't used it, look next door to the person next to you. I'm sure they've got the app. Ask them how to use it. And while you're on there, please take the NC Moves the 2050 survey. That survey helps us gather data and ideas and process what everybody's ideas are and how to move forward. At the end of the session, we'll have some time for questions. So as you're watching the presentations, if you have a question, be sure to remember it and ask your questions, because if you don't ask it, somebody else may have the same question and it not be answered. We're fortunate today to have two very knowledgeable guest speakers with us here. Ms. Deb Matherly, who has 4 decades of transportation planning experience, with the last 20 in emergency planning and resiliency. She graduated from Northern Kentucky University and earned an MBA from Hood College in Maryland. She is currently working on 2 projects with the National Cooperative Highway Research Program. And our other guest is Don Birchoff. He's a meteorologist and CEO of True Weather Solutions, which provides micro weather data and analytics for various flight activities. Don is a 24-year Air Force veteran and a retired colonel, and he earned his BS in meteorology from New York State, and he has a master's in science degree, the National Security Strategy from the National War College. Ms. Deb will be our first speaker, followed up by Don. So if you would, please welcome Ms. Deb Matherly.
Thank you very much for welcoming me here for North Carolina DOT. I'm very honored to be speaking with you. And I'd also like to say thanks to a couple of my colleagues who provided me with some North Carolina specific information. Most of my information is more from a national perspective, so trying to bring it home a little bit here. So thank you. Let's see. Okay. So talking a little bit, we've had a lot of talk about resilience. There's many different definitions. There's a couple of them here on the screen. It's also been defined as robustness, bouncing back stronger, being proactive. The essence is really to be prepared and forward-looking rather than backward-looking, future-ready, aware, nimble. There's a lot of great aspects about resilience. And resilience is becoming increasingly important to departments of transportation. In July of 2019, Carlos Braceras, who is the chief executive of Utah Department of Transportation, and at least at that time he was the president of AASHTO, was testifying before Congress about their new bill. And he was speaking about the importance of resilience to all of our transportation infrastructure and other infrastructure. And he happened to be holding up a copy of Resilience, a DOT Imperative, which is a CEO primer that we had just handed him a couple of days before at a conference. He was saying, you know, the Transportation Research Board developed this product. This is an important topic for all of us. So it was a really great call out, and I do have some additional copies of this up here if you want to get a copy yourself, because I'll be mostly talking from what we learned in this study as we talked to CEOs around the country at all the AASHTO regional meetings, and on phone conversations and some in-person conversations. And we have a lot of quotes from them. And we found out, you know, some DOTs in some states are really not allowed to mention the word climate change, but they're having to deal with the effects of it. And so that's where this one quote is one of my favorites. Whatever you call it, customers expect this work to be done. They expect us to keep things working. And that's really the bottom line of what resilience is for departments of transportation. So again, in resilience planning, transportation is essential to the functioning of the whole community, to the social fabric, to the economy, to really everything that happens there. But departments of transportation are not isolated either. We're completely interdependent with things like water, communications, power, and in many cases, the DOTs are co-located with these facilities. If a road washes out, it may take out the power lines as well, and then if the power goes out, the traffic signals may not work. So we all know about these links, but we need to be, the DOT needs to be working with all of its partners in terms of finding the weak links, resolving those weak links. And it may seem like a jeopardy, but it's also an opportunity, because understanding how you're all working together makes it easier to find common solutions to make things happen better. And this lower picture is a small partnership example in Maine and Minnesota and probably other states. In some places, culverts are being improved, or in some cases actually being turned more into a bridge, because it not only decreases maintenance costs, but it also improves fish passages. And so departments of tourism are saying, yes, let's do this. We want more fish, so we have more tourists, so we have more revenue. So that you can find win-win solutions in resilience. It's not always just a high off cost somewhere. And it's important to implement it throughout the DOT, and I've been learning that North Carolina has some resilience people in various places, and that's terrific. Many DOTs have a lot of silos. The emergency preparedness people may not be talking to the project development people, for example, but most DOTs also have some overarching functions like asset management and safety and sustainability. Safety in particular is something that's been part of, it's everybody's job. That's been going on for decades now. Asset management is more recent. Resilience is really something that can encapsulate all of those and can be bridged onto asset management, safety, and the other functions, so that everyone understands that resilience is part of their job, that they're looking at their jobs really through a resilience lens to say, okay, how can I be more forward-looking? How can I be more proactive? How can I identify a risk in its early stages and not just when it becomes a big problem? So, and that's really how it can be baked in, as some places say. Okay. And many conversations on resilience begin with talking about risks and hazards. And it's important to be smart about risks. You can never buy down 100% of the risk. It wouldn't make sense. But you can set priorities, and you probably may recognize the pictures of Hurricane Ophelia in the Davis community and the Bat Cave mudslide. And as we just heard, North Carolina is now taking steps to make I-95 more resilient. I know my son got stuck on 95 a few years ago when it was flooded and took him like 12 hours to do a trip that should have taken 3. So, yeah. So it's let's see. And so it's important to be very wise and to consider equity in the investments, and also the criticality of assets, and in some places you may need to build redundancy so that people have an alternative way in if their primary route gets flooded frequently. And also you may need to consider if you're thinking of a big bridge project and the community you're thinking of connecting to may not be there in 5 years, you want to just continue that project. You may have to walk away from things as changes occur. And that's because the hazards are not going away. As we've all seen, the storms are becoming more frequent, are becoming more severe, and just from 2004 to 2018, the hurricanes and tropical storms took up 84% of the funding for the North Carolina DOT federally declared events. The other big events, in addition, were like rock slides and mudslides, winter storms, a nor'easter, and fires. And on top of these events, of these declared events, there are the minor disasters, tornadoes, earthquakes, more kinds of fires, just small flooding. And so no county in the state is immune from these kind of disasters, and a large number of them impact transportation. So how do DOTs go about becoming more resilient? As we talked about the different functions in a DOT, one of the foundations in a lot of DOTs is really focusing on operations and maintenance. And the O&M folks, they're the boots on the ground, they're the eyes and ears. They know the hot spots and the wet spots, and they know really what needs to be done in terms of taking care of the roadways, the bridge approaches, etc. And it only makes sense that a well-maintained roadway or bridge approach or bridge or rail line is going to be more resilient than one that's already on the verge of collapse. So good maintenance is a great foundation for resilience. And because of this, many DOTs have started including operations and maintenance personnel on their teams for project planning and design planning and engineering throughout the construction project to make sure that long-term maintenance considerations are built into the projects from the very beginning and not tacked on to the end. Oh, you mean we might need to add a lane when we're doing a major repair? So it's just smart to include operations and maintenance from the beginning. In emergency operations and response, there's always a lot of turnover, so training is essential. And your neighbors to the south, South Carolina DOT, every year before hurricane season, they send their staff out to actually put the materials out that would be needed for on the evacuation routes. Actually position the materials and then afterwards remove them, because they found people need to know where to go, and they don't want to be doing that in the middle of an emergency. They want to do it in advance and correct any problems ahead of time. And also a lot of DOTs have, including North Carolina, have maintenance management systems and bridge management systems that are used to order, get work orders after emergencies, to identify damages and failures, and then to track this funding so that they can get reimbursement from Federal Highway and FEMA. So in other words, building everyday practices into the emergency practices is something that helps everybody. Oh, let's see, did I? Okay. And one other point is that it's important to also ensure that when you're doing a short-term recovery project, you know, you're just trying to get something back on the street very quickly, that you're not precluding the ability to build back better, because in many cases you'll want to make an improvement. So it's just keeping those things in mind and thinking ahead of if something really were damaged, how would we want to be rebuilding it? And having some of those things in your hip pocket is helpful. In the asset management is becoming more and more a part of everybody's work, and now is required to include resilience, but sometimes the definitions can change on that. So in the primer, as I mentioned, we have 2 or 3 pages of questions to ask, and on all of these different topics that we include. And a couple that we have on asset management are, one, how do asset management life cycle and risk assessments consider weather and other threats? And how does procurement incorporate life cycle assessments into procurement decisions? So these are some foods for thought about, you know, how much resilience can be part of everything that everyone does. Okay. And as you mentioned, design and engineering is great. Florida Department of Transportation has started designing, has installed mast arms for its signals and signs along the coastlines to withstand hurricane force winds. That makes it easier to rebuild. And they've also started building some seawalls in a few places and elevating roads in some places. And as we talked before, Maine Department of Transportation, Maine Department of Transportation after Hurricane Sandy increased its design standards for some bridges and for most culverts to about a 500-year storm standard. Since then, they've had virtually no blowouts on the culverts that they replaced. And they found out that their maintenance expenses went way down because they're not having to clear them constantly. And again, they've had much better fish passage and environmental improvements in there as well. So in terms of technology, Virginia DOT has invested in basically corrosion-free bridges, buying materials that are more expensive up front, but that help the lifespan of the bridge tremendously. And of course, it has to be very selective. Utah DOT uses drones for most of its preliminary bridge inspections. Then it can, you know, if it knows that if they find something problematic where they need an in-person inspection, they can do that. But they start off with drones, and they also use the drones for landslide assessments and for topographic assessments. So there's, again, using different kinds of technology. And there's also lots of technology that can, like both decrease temperatures on roads, you know, keep temperatures down, and others that lengthen the pavement life. So all of these can improve resilience. And another big one that North Carolina is doing a lot of work on is this automated monitoring. And this is a map showing the flood inundation mapping and alert network. So you know when the flooding is decreased to a point where you can go out and start working on it. And you also have the road closures. So that kind of monitoring is relatively inexpensive and can have a big payoff. There's a lot of bridge monitoring as well, and especially for older bridges that were built before current truckload weights in some cases. It's important to keep monitoring those. So, in summary, I guess the 3 words might be to be collaborative, be proactive, and be smart. And so, welcome questions at the end of the session, and thank you.
Sure. Well, while they're doing that, how's everybody doing today? Do you guys want to sit down? Because you're all right. I just want to make sure. I didn't know if you did not want to disrupt other people, or you just wanted to be holding up the wall. All right. It's good. Thank you. So, how many of you folks here how many of you are in jobs where weather impacts your job? I'm not talking about getting to work in the morning. I'm talking about in your job. Okay, good. That's good. I mean, it's bad, it's good, right? It's good for me, it's bad for you, because you have some interest, right? And how many of you think that weather people shouldn't be paid because they're only right half the time? Okay. All right, it's not so bad. Usually more hands go up. So I don't know. People in the South are always kind, though. That's the thing. They won't tell me the truth. No, we, that's always a big factor in the way you make decisions, right, about weather resiliency. It's, can I trust these guys, right, and to make these decisions? And so that's part of what, we deal with in the weather business, and trying to understand how we can better, message and get things out to convey a sense of certainty or uncertainty that can help you make decisions, right? And that's part of what you should be thinking about when you're working with weather folks and weather resiliency. I will tell you, I know that North Carolina takes weather resiliency seriously, obviously, or resiliency in general, because I had this session, and I really take my hat off to them for this, because resiliency, is not a program, right? These board members or your director for DOT can't tell you, I want you to implement resiliency programs. What does that mean, right? It's really a mindset. It's a mindset, and it's a mindset that has to always be learning and understanding, looking at processes, understanding what the tools are that are around you, that are available to solve a problem and to work it, right? And you can't dictate that. I was a colonel, and I knew my limitations of power, right? There's things that went on in the flight line at night that I had no power over, right? So you have to train people to think on their own and to recognize opportunities and to be empowered and take action on resiliency, right? Because that's the only way it's going to get done properly. So, 2 other solutions, we're a micro weather data and analytics company, and we are focused on weather resiliency for transportation systems. And, I have a pretty deep background in logistics. I'm a weatherman, but I'm also ran a base. I understand moving stuff, people, assets. It was the main staging base going to Afghanistan, Manas. And so I understand how weather impacts that. They used to hate me because, I was the weather guy, so I would tell them how to do things a little differently than they were used to, because I would come in and say, no, this is going to happen. This snowstorm is going to happen, and this is what we're going to do. And they go, well, how do you know you're right? Well, I know I'm right, so just do it, right? I had a fight with myself. How accurate am I making these decisions? So so we focus what we're doing is taking those lessons that we learned, that I've learned through the years on how do you integrate information and weather with operations, infrastructure decisions, and equipment decisions, right? And how you do it smartly and based on facts, not based on, you know, your feelings about it, right? No matter how you feel about the weather guy. But my focus is also on the automation age, because this is where, you know, there's going to be new challenges coming about due to automation, due to autonomous vehicles, ground and air. And today I'm going to focus on two frameworks for weather resiliency considerations, or two aspects of it. You know, what we could do today and what you need to be thinking about for the future as planners. So, you know, today's, you know, transportation systems, you know, it's difficult to become more weather resilient in some areas of equipage and infrastructure overnight, right? I mean, those are projects that take time and effort. There's some tactical things you can do. But basically, when you're talking about weather resiliency in the short range, you're talking really about what you could do with operations innovation, right? And I think the best opportunity in this area is to really have a mindset about being better prepared for natural disasters and for impacts by really, you know, working to achieve and accomplish things to have better weather data services in your state. And some of that is on the state. You know, the federal government's not going to come in and put in a lot of weather sensors for, say, the autonomous vehicle industry. They don't have the money. I know this because I used to be the science and technology director at the National Weather Service. And I could tell you that the automation age is going to require weather people and weather systems to be better than they've ever been. And we're not yet there. And so, you know, the government's not going to, you know, the federal government's not going to solve this problem, right? It's going to have to be solved at the lower levels, and it's going to require public and private partnerships and new business models and ideas for how to really unleash the innovation and the technology and science that is out there in the nation's labs and universities, but just can't get out to the system. How many people here, you know, in the NCDOT get frustrated by bureaucracy and know there's better technology out there, but you can't get it, right? It's the same problem in the federal government. And what I would tell you is that it's going to take an innovative public-private partnership smartly to get those new capabilities unleashed. And, you know, when it comes to natural disasters, this means, you know, trying to, you know, acquire or accomplish better data services, better decision tools, you know, where you know, there's a lot of data. I was talking earlier to somebody about, hey, there's so much data. I can, you know, I have 3 apps. I get different information. The whole idea there is you need to have a service that just cuts through all that and just gives you what you need in insights that are simple to make decisions. Don't worry about trying to be the weather person, because you'll never, you know, be the weather person. Worry about knowing that you're using the right data, you're getting the right data, test those providers, and then make sure your decision tools are using that data in ways that are going to really have effects and processes. And it's the same with training, and it's the same with our emergency responders in their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I did that on my base. You know, when we had fog and they were supposed to go out and do they had all these IoT sensors that were looking for bad guys, and it was foggy. I knew I'd go down to the Security Operations Center because I knew they weren't doing what they should have been doing. They should have been running more patrols out there, right? Because they can't see anything. So I go in there and go, hey, how are things going out there? Oh, everything's fine. Well, how do you know? You can't see anything. Well, do you have more patrols going? No, I don't. Oh, well, then you really don't have a good handle on this, do you? Right? These are the kinds of weather. There are techniques for weather and doing things in operations. There's a billion of them, and every one of them can increase resiliency, whether it's security resiliency or safety. So that's, you know, think about that and how you can reduce the fog of war and increase interoperability. This is an example. This is an education. All right. So the UAV industry, which, you know, I've decided that's the area I want to go into with weather because it's so underserved and there's so much work to be done. This is how an MIT Lincoln Lab study assessed the products coming out of the government to support the UAS industry. And green is not the best. Blue is the best. My point is that these products for this industry are not going to work to scale a robust UAS industry. We have to have better products. Otherwise, businesses are going to lose money. They're going to, the ROI is going to be impacted. They're not going to be able to fly when they want to fly. They could fly more than they think they can or whatever. So we need to look at that. And it's the same thing with autonomous ground vehicles. If we put up a chart for autonomous ground vehicles, it would be the same thing. Because, no matter what people tell you, there's no such thing as an all-weather vehicle. I mean, fighter pilots used to tell me this back in 1991. Hey, I got an F-16. It's all weather. I go, okay, so what do you do when there's 2 feet of snow on the ground? Well, I didn't mean that. Well, what do you do when there's icing, severe icing? Well, I didn't mean that. Well, what do you do when the ceiling is and the visibility is down to 0, 0? Well, I didn't mean that. Well, what did you mean then? What's all weather to you, right? All weather to them was we can work in sunny skies every day, right? That's all weather, right? And every one of these sensors that are on vehicles, whoa, well, every one of these, yeah, I got excited. No, every one of these sensors that we're implementing on these vehicles, they all have weather weaknesses. GPS, if you have a solar, radiation particle storm, your GPS is impacted. Your communications are impacted to communicate with your drones. Do you know moisture impacts cellular signals? Do you know if it's raining too hard, you can lose signal? Now, you may not be in the rain. You think, oh, I'm not in the rain. Yeah, but maybe the shower is somewhere over here, and you're in the nice weather, and you can't get a signal, right? Same on the ground. Visual sensors are impacted, just like your eyeballs, right? IR sensors, infrared, impacted by moisture. LiDAR, impacted by heavy rain, So you have to have a village of sensors, and we want that. That's what we advocate for, but we also know that we need to have better microweather and microclimate information to keep people safe. That means we need a better system for that, and that's what we work on at True Weather. We're working on the microweather data side of it, and we're working on trying to make sure organizations are using consistent data in their decision systems. Because if you have 2 people in an organization using 2 different weather apps, but they both are in the same workflow, and they both come to a different conclusion about the weather, and they both make different decisions about what they're going to do that aren't aligned with what the ecosystem is expecting, you have chaos, right? And chaos isn't ever a good thing, because at some point they'll come together and figure it out. Oh, well, I thought that, that's why Harry is out there, and if they're at the wrong intersection, they're expecting the wrong thing, whatever. These things. This is what happens. I know this because I saw operational chaos when I ran the base, right? And so what we want to do is try to reduce that chaos and having consistent data, even if it's not perfect weather data, even if even if Harry's app is a little bit better than Julie's app, that's not important. What's important is you're all operating off the same data. Right? That's what's important. Otherwise, who cares? So Julie's a hero or Harry's a hero and everybody else, they're a mess, right? So think about that in your resiliency as you're thinking about weather. And think about how you're going to integrate this data into your decision systems at a very granular level so that you have interoperability and you're impacting workflows. And all the workflows are being impacted the same, you're getting the same data into those workflows. And using decision analytics to help you actually do asset deployment or pre-deployment, or what assets are we going to use for this particular event, and how are we going to get them out there, and what are going to be the tactics we're going to use, and making sure the operators are trained on understanding how weather impacts their systems and their operations. You do all that, and you can have like a 40% improvement in effectiveness using weather information when weather's a factor. And most of the time when you're dealing with a natural disaster, weather's a factor. Sometimes the weather, you think it passes, but how do you know when you're going to get your drones up after the storm? You may have strong winds behind the storm, right? How are you going to know, how are you going to know if you don't have strong winds and you're waiting to get a drone up? Maybe you need to get other ground assets out there, right? To make sure, because you couldn't wait, and there's people under rubble, right? Well, how do you know your drones are going to, thermal drones are going to see, the thermal imagery is going to see those folks, because there's all kinds of thermal crossover with sunlight and heat and those are, the military, when I was in the military, we had very sophisticated decision tools that told us if we could see a tank or not with an IR weapon. And it was based on the heat. how much was the sun out? Was it not out? And that's the kind of sophistication eventually we're going to get to with these sensors on drones. And we'll become even more efficient at using them. Not sending somebody out to look for something. What happens if they fly over someplace and they don't see anything because it was an environmental condition that caused you not to see it? But there really is somebody down there. These are the kinds of things that, this is all about the education, right? So now in the long term, I think about, what could we do to, help you prepare in the future? And of course, in this case, equipment and infrastructure become more critical, right? Because operations, who knows what the hell in 20 years how we're going to be operating, right? We don't want to worry about that. We want to worry about the equipment, the OEMs, what kind of equipment is going to be on these vehicles. We want to worry about the equipment you're using. We want to worry about the infrastructure. Do you have weather sensors in that infrastructure? Urban scale. I will tell you right now that the urban environment is going to be very difficult to fly drones. If you went outside this building yesterday and made a right, I tell you, I hit a headwind that I think had to be going down that street about 40 or 50 because I was like pushing myself to walk. But that would not be in the forecast because it was a Ventura effect, right? But as Deb was talking earlier about these new materials for highway design and things like that, you need to consider what the future climate's going to be like so that you can properly design and construct to those future needs. And then in terms of how do you do that? Well, unfortunately, for many years, climatology was really stable. You could go and say, 100-year flood. Yeah, it was 100 years. Anybody in here with a gray beard and a gray hair, used to pull up the 100-year maps and they go, oh, okay, 100 years. But it doesn't work anymore, does it? And the problem is it's changing so fast. So, and how are we going to know in 20 years what it's going to be? And so how do you plan for that now? You can't use those same techniques, right? So how do you do that? What does 6-inch sea level rise mean to the Outer Banks? What does it mean to the towns along there and the different areas that you're working? The land is sinking, in Norfolk. So, and I'm sure it is in parts of like northeast North Carolina too, because that was due to the glaciers rebound. When the glaciers melted, we had, the Great Lakes went down from all the weight, and it's a seesaw, right? And now it's starting to settle down, and so you have a combination of that and the climate change. So, there's all these factors going on. You need to have professional environmental people involved in this. You need to hire professional folks that understand these forces when you make these decisions. And you need to make sure you're talking with cutting-edge people who understand all the tools that are out there. Make sure you're bringing in people that can help you understand what the tools are that you can use to make those decisions. What the warmer summers mean in North Carolina, right? How are different areas going to be impacted? The cities are going to be impacted much more than the rural areas, right? These are things you got to think about. And what do more severe storms mean, right, for you? Hurricanes, weather, right? Harvey, man. So Houston, they had deployed assets before Harvey, knowing there was going to be 40 inches of rain, right? By the way, Harvey, there was a study that came out the other day that said Harvey had 8% more rainfall due to climate change. That storm, if it would have occurred, 1940s, it would have been 8% less rain. Now, you might say, well, who cares? 40 inches is a lot of rain. You're right. But, you guys and you engineers, you do actually build systems where 8% can make a difference, right? So, but my point is that for Harvey, what was interesting is they deployed these assets, but they really didn't have a good handle on which rivers were going to flood and which areas were going to flood. So they had, after it happened, they had emergency management folks trapped in parts of the city, and they could not get to where the main areas were hit. That's why, the fact that you guys have the flood inundation stuff and all that is really good. You got to use that. You got to be thinking proactively. How do I make sure I don't get people trapped somewhere else where I don't need them because I can't get them to where I need them, right? These kind of things you got to think about. So, so in closing, I think that my main gist of today is that there are I'm not saying we would do this, so I'm not selling me here because I'm not a climate expert, all right? But there are companies out there that run, you're going to have to learn how to combine climatology that we do have with a predictive climatology, right? To kind of, whatever you feel about climate change, I'm going to assure you of one thing. We really do know what we're doing, all right, on this. We understand, when we build new climate models, we actually rerun them using past data to see if the model actually worked for now. Like, we might run it with data from 1960s and then say, hey, what happened in 2020? And then we go out and we look and go, oh, not bad, or we tweak it, we learn. I mean, we're not idiots, right? Everyone, I don't get this, right? So my point is that these are not bad models, all right? These are not bad for like 40 years out. They've been tuned. They're not going to be perfect. Tomorrow's weather forecast is not perfect. But what they can also do is take you down to the local level. They can downscale it right down to your location that you're working in. And what that does is it takes away that, well, it's going to be 2.3 degrees warmer globally. What does that mean to you, right? No, they can get it down to, what do we think the impacts are going to be in certain counties in North Carolina? And turn that 2.3 degrees into something that's more meaningful to you, right? And that's what these services could do. So I really encourage you to put that in your planning, put that in your budget, and don't go willy-nilly on this, and don't pull articles off the internet. Try to have professionals. Just like when you're making decisions that are life or death, you shouldn't be using weather off of an app. And I'm not saying that because I'm selling something here. I'm saying that because that data is not for the right time, the right location, the right application that you're trying to make a decision about. It's not. And then you're interpreting that, and you're putting your own biases into that interpretation that it may or may not be, accurate. And that's why sometimes things don't seem like they're working. We're actually about 74% accurate in weather. So I'll leave you with that. You don't believe it? I saw your head. You were going back. That's 24 hours and up to 3 days. And then after 3 days, obviously. Now, if you're using a weather forecast beyond 5 days to plan when you're going to have a picnic, at what hour, at what day, in what park, then you're crazy. I would tell you that. I'll tell you how to use the data. I'll tell you when we suck, I will. But let us tell you when we suck, all right? All right. That's it. Thank you.
Well, it's a good crowd here today. I'm thrilled that you're here. After lunch, I was telling Alan earlier that if we had half a room, it'd be nice. But this is a real tribute to this program. My name is Gus Telus, and I'm a board member, transportation like Alan, and I'm from Rocky Mount. And Rocky Mount, like a lot of towns, has really had some flood and hurricane situations back during Floyd. It was just incredible. Our whole town was covered. It was just underwater. And then you go down from Rocky Mount to Tarboro and Princeville, and that was flooded. And of course, we've all seen what's happened in Kinston and the last hurricanes we had there and floods. But it's devastating when it happens, and I think Don and Deb have done a wonderful job talking about it and how to prepare for some of it. But just here in North Carolina, we got a little budget crunch going on in DOT. Well, a lot of you may or may not know, we've been putting aside about $66 million a year to cover hurricanes and floods, rock slides, stuff like that. 66 million a year. The last 2 years, and Grady, our fellow board member, knows what I'm going to say. The last 2 years, each year, it's cost us about $260 some million a year. And you take that in a 2-year period, and you can sort of understand where your budget's going to end up. So it's really just devastating when this type of stuff happens. So I think this is a great subject we're covering today, and a great program, and I think they've done just a wonderful job. So I think at this time, and we've got a few minutes left, I'd like to take any questions that anybody may have directed either at Deb or Don or Alan. You're talking about somebody that knows about situation. Alan's from Manio, so he's the expert. But anyway, any questions at all? All right, I'm going to assign a couple to y'all if you don't.
Wait, we have a question.
I know, I'm teasing.
I'm afraid of your question.
So this is a question for Don. Can you give me a little bit more definition about micro weather? What is your definition of micro weather?
Sure, I'll give you that definition. Hello, okay. So my definition of micro weather is any weather events that occur within sub 1 kilometer grid points. 1 kilometer, 0.6 of a mile. So in this case, it could be that, I'll give you an example, drones, right? Drones have battery power limitations. And when they're going to start flying beyond visual line of sight, there are a lot of climates here in North Carolina where if you fly in a valley or you fly on a ridge, you're going to experience winds that you didn't experience either on the ground or at where you took off from. And our models are really right now tuned to 3 kilometer resolution, 3 kilometer grid. And we're not seeing those winds, right? So a lot of times there's surprises. Now, you might say, well, are they dangerous? Are they going to crash? I say, well, you know, they definitely hurt their ROI because they can't complete their missions, which means they have to fly again, or they push their limits and their battery runs out early and things of that nature. So we got to get those winds right. So I say sub 1 kilometer is what and generally I think that's what our industry would say is micro.
Along those same lines, Don, I have a question. As far as micro, you said 0.6 kilometers, 0.6 miles, 1 kilometer. Is there a time frame? Because I know the old adage, everybody's heard, North Carolina, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes. So is there a time frame on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would tell you this, that I don't ever suggest that anybody buy a model from us that's a 1 kilometer resolution beyond 24 hours. It doesn't make sense. It's a waste of money because the larger weather is going to change and it's going to impact that microclimate. But I would say really what you're really talking about is less than 6 hours, 3 to 6 hours out into the future.
All right, more questions? Yeah, okay.
So everyone can hear.
My name's Greg Dean. I'm with the Carolinas Concrete Paving Association. There was a slide that Mary showed that kind of summarized the spending. Oh, I'm sorry, Deb. I'm sorry,
Deb.
Deb. Must have been looking at the wrong one. But there was a slide that Deborah showed that summarized the spending, I think, by the state for each of the events. And I'd like to get your input on this thought. It's something that I've looked at and looked at some of the storms across the country, and some of the things, the research I've seen is that we seem to only capture the immediate costs and not the hidden costs. I'm a pavement guy, and some of the research has shown, because of the saturated subgrades, that we're actually doing more damage to the pavements than what we're actually seeing immediately post-storm. That some of these pavements, or because of the subgrade saturation, is actually, having impacts, 2 years down the life, 3 years down the life. Are you aware of anything, again, on a national trend that's kind of capturing these hidden costs to these storms, not just these immediate costs?
Well, that's a very good point. I've seen a study recently which is talking about the length of saturation is actually more important than almost the amount of saturation. So if it's saturated for 24 hours, it's going to take a lot longer to recover and such things. And no, I have not seen anything on that, although I do know that these are just for nationally declared disasters, and I believe that they capture costs up to a year after the event, but I haven't seen anything in terms of 2 or 3 years after that. So yeah, that is a very good point. And there are slow-moving disasters, like deterioration of infrastructure and all that really isn't captured either. So that's something that should be looked into. That's a good point.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, we have
Yeah.
one back here.
All right, Andrew.
Yes, I'm a permeable pavement guy who wants to see permeable pavers on our road shoulders and our places where we can accommodate the same traffic weight or greater, but the water goes through and it captures some of the contaminants from the road and as well as takes care of that long-term use and the problems with stormwater runoff. So I'd like to hear resiliency related to 10, 15-year warranties on road pavers that allow water to go through them.
I think that is an excellent idea, and I didn't mention it, but there's a lot of belief that a lot of the flooding damage is really related to land use and with overpaving items, and so your solution of permeable sidewalls, it makes a lot of sense. In terms of setting policy, again, that would be something I think DOT should definitely be looking at as both a resilience and a long-term cost savings method. So, I'd suggest you keep following up with that.
Good. Thank you. Good question. Yeah. Any other? Let me close with 2 questions. I'll ask Deb one and then ask Don one. To Deb, said, what are some of the key lessons learned about improving hurricane evacuations in a state?
Okay. Well, there's been a lot of work, like I provided the example of South Carolina DOT using its, putting its materials out ahead of time. And a lot of places actually use contraflow lanes. I believe North Carolina and South Carolina both use that in many cases as well. And it's important. One of the really important things is the staging, is letting people know when they need to go, and also letting, where people, preventing the shadow evacuation is crucial. In other words, people who don't need to leave shouldn't be leaving because they're getting in the way of the people who really do need to leave, and that was a big factor in Hurricane Rita and many other events. So being very accurate in the information and not scaring everybody, oh yeah, the end of the world is coming, everybody get out of here. No, because it's usually a fairly limited area that actually needs to move, and others are probably safer staying in place unless you're going to have horrible winds and such. So
Very good.
Okay.
That was great. All right, Don, we'll close with this one. A lot of people are buying drones today. How can the average consumer use them for weather updates?
So I want to make sure I understand your question. So you're saying, how could the average consumer use them for weather update? The drones themselves for weather like to collect weather data?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Boy, that's a really sophisticated, good question. That is a key component of my strategy, right? That's a really good question. And, we talked about sub 1 kilometer resolution. Modeling only gets us so far. Modeling will always get us so far because models are limited by data going in as well as computing power and the science, right? So we have a technique called post-processing, right, and we'll use machine learning, right? So what's happening here is if we have, I always like to have a fixed-based in situ sensors on the, I like to see them on towers for drones. I like to see You know, every sensor, every cell phone tower in you know, North Carolina have weather sensors or wind sensors at 200 feet. You know, that would make me so happy because we're blind as a bat right now aloft. But you then talked about getting the data off of the drones, which would then become another source of mobile collection of data, which we can then, we're going to learn a lot about these local environments. That's going to improve our modeling and do machine learning. And we'll be able to, in real time, have a better handle on what's really happening. And with our better modeling and our real time, we will be able to keep people flying longer because we'll be confident about what's happening. And we'll be able to, we have a weather sense drone. We have a partner that's developed a actual professionally weather instrumented drone that's been approved, tested by NOAA. And I want to get that out and use that as what I call a weather scout. And we would put that out when everybody's grounded or a lot of people are grounded. We would have a drone that could go up and fly and collect data and keep it flying and say, okay, right now things have gotten better, get them back in the air. Normally what I have found in my career is that if you don't have that kind of data, people sit on the ground 20, 30% longer because of uncertainty and you lose that flight time. The same on the front end, people will come down earlier than they need to. But the more certainty we can get using that data off of drones, the better. And so if all drones are required to have a sensor, weather sensor, which I'm not going to advocate that because I have the people will be really getting mad at me because it costs money and weight. But I would love it. You know, I would love it. And there will be people, that's a business model where people will buy the data. They will buy the data. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
All
Good
right.
job. All right, we'll close now, and let's give these two a big hand. They did a great job. Really appreciate you being here, and appreciate everybody coming today and participate. And if anybody needs any documentation to obtain your PE, Professional Engineer Accreditation, or your PDH, Professional Development, stop by and the table, and we'll get you that information. Again, thanks for being here, and at 2:45 we'll reconvene.